My name is Eleanor Parker, and I'm 59 years old. I'd always considered myself a fairly ordinary woman, never one for much attention or extravagance, but someone who loved her family deeply. I thought my life was in a good place, that the decisions I'd made, staying by my late husband James's side through thick and thin, raising my son David, and later welcoming grandchildren, had all led me to a sense of peace and fulfillment. But that day, my granddaughter Maya's wedding, was the day I realized how much my family had taken me for granted, how little they saw me as the woman I truly was. The morning of the wedding, I took extra time getting ready. I wasn't vain, but I wanted to look my best for Maya. She was my first grandchild, and I had watched her grow from a sweet little girl into the beautiful woman she was now, about to get married. I chose a soft green dress that James had always loved on me. He'd always said it brought out the green in my eyes. It was a dress I wore on our anniversaries, and it carried memories of happier times. I styled my hair carefully, curling the edges like I had done for years. The final touch was the perfume James had given me for our last anniversary before he passed away from a sudden heart attack 6 years ago. That perfume always reminded me of him, of those sweet, quieter days when life felt simple and full of promise. As I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my dress, I whispered to myself, "You look radiant, Eleanor." For a brief moment, I imagined James standing beside me, telling me those same words. I could almost hear his voice, feel his presence next to me. It was comforting, and for a moment, I felt the weight of the day lift off my shoulders. The ceremony at St. Andrew's Chapel was everything I had hoped for, romantic, beautiful, and full of love. Maya looked like a dream as she walked down the aisle, her face glowing with happiness. My son, David, walked her down the aisle with such pride. I had always thought of David as my rock, the one who had grown up to be a responsible man and father. Even Linda, my daughter-in-law, seemed to shed a tear, something I hadn't seen her do before. It was a fleeting moment of warmth and joy that made me feel like everything was right in the world. But little did I know, the reception would be where the facade of family happiness would start to crumble. The Riverstone Ballroom was a grand venue, one I had helped fund for the wedding. The extravagance of it all was overwhelming, but I was happy to contribute to such an important day. I walked into the ballroom, my heels clicking on the marble floor, and approached the check-in table. The young woman behind the counter greeted me with a cheerful smile. "Here you are, Mrs. Parker," she said, handing me my name tag. I took it from her, expecting it to read Eleanor Parker, grandmother of the bride, but as I glanced down, I froze. The name tag didn't say Eleanor Parker. Instead, it read, "The lady who pays for everything. Cheers to her." My stomach dropped, and I felt my face burn with embarrassment. My hand trembled as I held the tag, staring at it in disbelief. Was this some kind of joke? A mistake? I glanced up at the young woman, trying to keep my composure. She noticed my expression and asked if something was wrong. I forced a smile. "It's just a mix-up," I said quickly, not wanting to cause a scene. I pinned the name tag to my dress, feeling a heavy weight settle on my chest. I couldn't understand why this had happened. This wasn't how I had imagined the day. It felt as though my entire existence had been reduced to a punchline, something to be laughed at. It was a feeling I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried to brush it off. As I moved through the reception, I did my best to enjoy myself. I spoke with a few guests, trying to ignore the name tag that now felt like an anchor weighing me down. Some didn't even seem to notice, while others were polite enough not to comment. But then, I overheard a conversation that stopped me in my tracks. "Did you see Eleanor's name tag?" someone whispered, followed by a snicker. Linda was talking to them, and I could hear her voice clearly. Apparently, she's just the one with the deep pockets. I wanted to disappear right there. My cheeks burned and my hands shook. It was then that I realized this was no accident. This wasn't just a joke. This was how my family, or at least David and Linda, truly saw me, as the woman who paid for everything. I tried to push the sting of the name tag and the whispers out of my mind, but as the evening wore on, it became increasingly difficult. I couldn't escape the feeling that my family's affection for me had been overshadowed by a blatant disregard for who I truly was. It wasn't just the name tag. It was everything that had led up to that moment. The more I thought about it, the more I realized just how much my son and daughter-in-law had come to rely on me, not as a mother or grandmother, but as a resource. The cocktail hour was a blur. I made small talk with a few friends and distant relatives, but my mind was preoccupied. I couldn't help but overhear another conversation between a couple of guests who had been talking about me. I didn't recognize them, but their words cut right through the chatter of the room. "Did you hear Eleanor's been funding this wedding? I heard she paid for most of it." They laughed, and I could hear the unmistakable tone of condescension in their voices. My hands were shaking, and I could feel the warmth of humiliation rising in my chest. I looked around, but no one seemed to notice, or at least they didn't acknowledge it. But how could they? They weren't the ones who had lived it, who had given away piece after piece of themselves to appease the growing demands of family. At that moment, I felt like I was a stranger in my own life. David spotted me across the room, and with that familiar, jovial wave, he called out to me, "Mom, come meet Tom and Sarah, old friends from the country club." I was hesitant, my stomach churned, but I couldn't refuse. This was my family, after all. I made my way over to them, trying to put on a smile. Tom and Sarah greeted me with smiles, but their eyes lingered on my name tag, and I could tell they didn't know what to make of me. "It's so nice to meet you," Tom said, shaking my hand, his smile more stiff than friendly. "I've heard so much about you. You must be proud of Maya." "Oh yes, I'm so proud," I replied, my voice a little tighter than I'd intended. "She's such a beautiful girl." The conversation moved on, but I was still stuck in that one moment. Sarah kept glancing at my name tag, and I could see her discomfort. I couldn't blame her, really. It wasn't her fault she was caught in the middle of a situation I didn't create. After a few more awkward exchanges, they excused themselves and moved on to another group of people. I stood there, my mind racing. David came up to me with a forced cheerfulness. "What did you think of Tom and Sarah? Great people, right?" he asked, completely unaware of the emotional storm I was battling. "David, what is going on here?" I asked, my voice low but firm. "Why did you let them put this on my name tag?" I motioned to the offensive words, my pulse quickening with frustration. "Why are they treating me like a joke? Like I'm just a bank?" David laughed, but it wasn't a warm, comforting laugh. It was more of an awkward chuckle, as though he didn't quite understand the gravity of my words. "Oh, Mom, don't be so sensitive. It's just a joke. Everyone knows you've been generous with us since James passed." I stared at him, my heart sinking. How had it come to this? How had he come to think that money was the only thing I had to offer? It was never about the money. It was about love, about connection, about supporting one another through the highs and the lows of life. "It's not funny, David," I said quietly, my voice trembling. I felt the tears welling up, but I swallowed them back. "It's humiliating, and I'm tired of being treated like this, like I'm only good for what I can give." Before he could respond, Linda appeared, gliding over in her beautiful gown, the picture of elegance. "Eleanor, there you are," she said brightly, her smile wide but not quite reaching her eyes. "Have you met everyone yet? We want everyone to know who's responsible for this beautiful wedding." She winked at me, as if it were all some sort of harmless fun. I forced a smile, but inside I felt as though I were crumbling. "Yes, Linda, I've met a few people," I replied, excusing myself. I needed a moment alone, away from the laughter and forced pleasantries. I headed to the restroom, hoping to collect myself. As I dabbed at my eyes, trying to fight back the tears that had suddenly come to the surface, I heard the door open. I quickly turned, startled, and was relieved to see a familiar face. It was Martin Jones, James's lawyer. He stepped inside, immediately apologizing for interrupting. "Mrs. Parker?" he said tentatively. "It's Martin Jones. I need to speak with you for a moment." "Of course, Martin," I said, wiping away the last of the tears. I followed him outside, hoping for some peace from the chaos of the evening. Martin was always kind to me, especially after James passed. He had been involved with James's estate, and I trusted him. "Eleanor," he said, glancing at the name tag I still wore, "I've noticed something, and I think it's time you knew about it." My heart skipped a beat. "What is it, Martin?" I asked. He hesitated for a moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This is a provision that James added to his will shortly before he passed. He wanted to protect you in case something like this ever happened." I took the envelope from him, my hands trembling as I opened it. The legal language was complex, but the meaning was clear. Any descendant who publicly humiliated me would forfeit their inheritance. I looked up at Martin, stunned. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? He didn't want you to ever feel like you were acting out of fear, Eleanor, Martin explained gently. James wanted to ensure that you were always treated with the respect you deserve. This is not just about the money. It's about protecting you from being treated like this. I glanced back toward the ballroom, my family still celebrating, completely unaware of the financial and emotional toll they had just placed on themselves. What do you want me to do, Martin? I asked. He smiled softly. It's up to you, but I believe James would want you to enforce it, should you choose to. The weight of his words settled in my chest. For the first time that night, I felt a sense of clarity. Something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about money. This was about respect, about reclaiming the part of myself that had been lost in all of their expectations. It was time for me to stand up for who I really was, and to stop letting them take advantage of me. The following morning, I woke up with a sense of unease hanging in the air, like a storm waiting to break. I still hadn't fully processed everything that had happened the night before. The name tag, the laughter, the overwhelming realization of how my family saw me. I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, still in my bathrobe, staring at the same name tag from the wedding. The lady who pays for everything? Cheers to her! The words mocked me, as if my entire existence had been reduced to nothing more than an open checkbook. I ran my finger over the elegant script, and a wave of anger washed over me. How had I let things get this far? How had I allowed them to use me like this, to treat me as though I were a mere source of funds? My heart ached as I thought of all the times I had given, freely, without hesitation, when my son David needed help with his house, or when Linda wanted to update their kitchen, or when they came to me asking for money for vacations, cars, and even the wedding. It wasn't that I didn't love them. Of course, I did. I had given my whole life to my family, caring for them, supporting them through every challenge, celebrating their successes, and sharing their burdens. I thought that was enough. But now, looking at the name tag and recalling the conversations I had overheard, I realized how much of it had been taken for granted. How much of my love had been reduced to transactions. The truth hit me hard. I had become a bank in their eyes. Not a mother, not a grandmother, a provider, an endless source of money they could turn to whenever they needed more. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about what I could give, what I could provide. And in that realization, a deep sadness began to settle in my chest, like the weight of the world pressing down on me. I knew I had to stop. But how? How could I change the narrative that had been written for me, where my worth was measured only by my ability to give, by my financial capacity? How could I stand up to my family, especially my son? The answer came to me in the quietest of moments, as I stared at that name tag. The provision in James's will, the codicil that Martin had revealed, became my lifeline. My husband, whom I had loved deeply, had seen this coming. He knew that I might one day need protection, that I might be taken for granted by the very people I had devoted my life to. And so, James had taken care of me even in his absence. I held the envelope Martin had given me, turning it over in my hands. There was power in that provision, power I didn't realize I had. I had the ability to stop this, to stop being treated like a financial instrument, to regain my dignity. James had left me more than money. He had left me the strength to stand up for myself, to reclaim my life. That evening, as I sat alone in my kitchen, I realized that I couldn't let this continue. I couldn't keep giving until I had nothing left. I had spent years putting my family's needs ahead of my own, making sacrifices because I thought that was what love required. But what had it gotten me? A family that saw me as a tool to be used, not as a woman with her own needs, her own desires. The decision was hard, but it was clear. I was going to take action. I couldn't keep allowing them to manipulate me into giving more than I was able, more than I was willing. I was going to enforce the codicil. It was time to stop being the lady who paid for everything and start being Eleanor Parker, the woman who was worthy of respect and love on her own terms. The next day, I called Martin. I need to understand everything about the will. Everything, I said, my voice steady. I needed to be fully informed before I made any decisions. I had to make sure I understood the full extent of my rights. When Martin met me in his office later that afternoon, he went through the details of the will again, explaining everything. James left you comfortable, Eleanor, but more than that, he left you the freedom to decide how to live your life. He wanted you to have peace, not just financially, but emotionally and mentally. You've always been there for your family, but it's time for you to stand up for yourself. His words resonated deeply with me. The more he spoke, the more I realized that it wasn't just about money. It was about boundaries, about creating a life where my choices were my own, not dictated by the constant demands of others. James's estate wasn't meant to be a tool for manipulation. It was meant to provide security for me, and I would use it to do just that. I thanked Martin for his help and walked out of his office, a newfound sense of purpose growing within me. I was no longer the woman who was afraid to say no. I was no longer the lady who paid for everything. I was Eleanor Parker, and I would start living my life on my own terms. The days following my decision to take control of my life were a blur, a mix of emotions I had never allowed myself to feel before: relief, guilt, empowerment, and uncertainty. I had spent years caring for everyone around me, always giving, always trying to be the one who made things easier, who kept the peace. But in doing so, I had lost sight of myself. The name tag incident, the whispered jokes at the wedding, and the realization that my family no longer saw me as a person with my own needs. They were all catalysts that had forced me to confront a truth I had been avoiding for far too long. The first thing I did after meeting with Martin was to sit down and write a letter to my son, David. It wasn't an easy task. I had never been one for confrontation, especially with him. I had always believed that a mother's love should be unconditional, and so for years, I gave him everything I could: financial support, emotional backing, and more. But now I knew that my role in his life needed to change. I couldn't keep enabling him. I couldn't keep playing the part of the bank while sacrificing my own happiness. David, I began, the words flowing more easily than I expected. I need to have an honest conversation with you. After everything that has happened recently, I've realized that I've been allowing you and Linda to treat me in a way that I no longer find acceptable. I've always tried to be there for you, to help you when you needed it. But I've come to see that my support has been taken for granted. It's no longer just about helping the family. It's about my dignity, my well-being. I paused, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about how he would react. I wasn't afraid of disappointing him. I had been afraid of disappointing myself for far too long. I know I've given you and Linda financial help over the years, and I've done so because I love you both. But I can no longer be the one who always says yes, the one who keeps giving without considering what it's doing to me. I am not just a source of money. I am your mother, and I deserve to be treated with respect and love, not as a walking ATM. I felt a lump in my throat as I wrote the final lines. I knew this letter would change things between us, and I wasn't sure what the future held. Would David be angry? Would he understand? I didn't know, but I had to do it. I had to stand up for myself, for the woman I was becoming. After writing the letter, I sat back in my chair and let out a long, steady breath. There was no turning back now. I couldn't unwrite what I had just put on paper, but I also realized that there was something freeing in saying it out loud, even if it was just to myself. The next few days were tense. I didn't hear from David, and I spent my time quietly reflecting on what my life had become. I began revisiting old hobbies, things I had set aside for years. I started painting again, something I had always enjoyed but never found the time for. I enrolled in a painting class at the community center, where I met people who shared the same passion and energy for art. It felt good to create something for myself again, to not have every decision and every action revolve around others. I also reached out to Ethan, my grandson. He had always been different from the others, quiet, thoughtful, and grounded. He had been the one to encourage me when I talked about opening my own art studio or even starting my own business. He was the one who reminded me that I still had time to dream, to make my own choices. We spent hours talking about his plans for a bookstore. He was full of ideas, and as I listened to him, I felt a sense of pride swelling inside me. Ethan was passionate about this bookstore, not just as a business, but as a space for community, a place where people could gather, read, and share ideas. His dream was simple, yet powerful, and it reminded me of the dreams I once had, the ones I had shelved in favor of everyone else's needs. I made the decision then I would invest in Ethan's bookstore. It was an investment in his future, yes, but also in mine. It was a way for me to put my money where my heart was, to support something that brought me joy and purpose. It was a way to show David and Linda that I had limits, that I would no longer give just because they demanded it, but because it mattered to me, because it was my choice. When I told Ethan I would help fund his bookstore, his eyes lit up with gratitude. "Grandma, you don't have to do this," he said, his voice full of emotion. "But I can't tell you how much it means to me." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was doing something for me. And it felt good. Later that week, I got a call from David. His voice was different this time, softer. "Mom, I got your letter," he said. "We need to talk." I took a deep breath, knowing that this conversation would change everything. But I was ready to stand firm, to let him know that I had found my voice, and I wasn't going to let anyone, even my son, treat me like I didn't matter. The phone call was long and difficult. David was upset at first, but as I explained how I had felt over the years, how I had been giving without receiving, how I had allowed their expectations to define me, he started to listen. It wasn't easy for him to understand, but he began to hear me. By the end of the conversation, he promised that he would try to respect my boundaries. It wasn't a perfect resolution. We still had a lot of work to do, but for the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my life again. I had reclaimed my dignity, my independence, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. The days after my conversation with David were quieter, but a tension lingered in the air, like an unsettled storm cloud. I had stood my ground, but I knew the road ahead would not be easy. It wasn't just about setting boundaries, it was about enforcing them, living them every single day. And for me, that was the hardest part. I'd spent so much of my life catering to the needs of others that I wasn't sure how to live in a way that was truly for me. But I was determined to figure it out. In the weeks that followed, I spent more time with Ethan. His excitement about the bookstore was contagious, and I found myself pouring more of my energy into his dream than I had given to anything in a long time. I helped him find a location for the bookstore and connected him with a few contacts I knew in the community. It felt good to support him in this way, not because I was expected to, but because I believed in what he was doing. It was something he had worked for, something he had a passion for, and for the first time in a long while, I felt proud, not just of him, but of myself. I was doing something right. One day, as we stood outside, a charming, small building that he was considering for the bookstore's location, Ethan turned to me and said, "Grandma, I don't know how to thank you for this. This means everything to me." His words hit me harder than I expected. Everything? It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the store itself. It was about the trust, the faith I was putting into him, and in turn, into myself. I realized then that this was the first time in a long while that I had done something because I wanted to, because it felt right, not because someone asked, not because I was supposed to, just because it aligned with what I wanted to see in the world. But there was still the matter of David and Linda. I hadn't heard much from them after our difficult conversation. David had been respectful, at least, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. I knew that their expectations of me hadn't disappeared. I could almost hear Linda's voice in my head asking for more, wanting more, just like she always had. But I wasn't going to give in. Not anymore. A few weeks later, as I was having a quiet afternoon in my garden, the doorbell rang. I didn't expect anyone, but when I opened the door, there stood David and Linda, their faces as carefully composed as ever. David held a small bouquet of flowers, and Linda, always put together, had a smile that seemed a little too tight. "Mom," David began, his voice tentative, "we've been talking, and we know we haven't been treating you the way you deserve. I've been thinking a lot about what you said." I stood there, not sure what to expect. Part of me wanted to shut the door right then, to tell them it was too late. But another part of me, the part that still loved them despite everything, wanted to hear what they had to say. So I let them in. We sat in the living room, and David started to speak, his words coming slower now, as though he was choosing them carefully. "I didn't realize, Mom. I guess I thought you would always be there to bail us out. I never thought about what that was doing to you, or how much you were giving. I've been selfish." Linda was quiet, her gaze directed downward. I couldn't tell if she was genuinely sorry or just worried about the financial repercussions. "I've always thought you'd just keep taking care of everything, Eleanor, and I see now that I was wrong. I'm sorry, too." Their apologies felt empty, like a part of them still expected things to go back to normal, like I'd let them off the hook and keep giving. But this time, I wasn't going to be swayed. I had made my choice, and I wasn't going to let guilt or their manipulation change that. "I appreciate your apologies," I said, my voice steady. "But we can't go back to the way things were. I've been giving, and I've neglected my own needs. It's time for me to put myself first. I'm not going to keep giving in the way I have been." David and Linda exchanged a glance, and I could see the discomfort on their faces. They didn't like it, but they had to understand. I wasn't a bank, a never-ending source of money. I was Eleanor, and I had a life to live, one where my happiness came before anyone else's demands. "I'm still here for you," I continued, my tone firm but not unkind. "But I have to do this for me. I can't keep sacrificing my peace for yours." There was a long silence, a heavy one. Then, David nodded, though his eyes were full of uncertainty. "I get it, Mom," he said quietly. "I'll respect that. We'll figure things out." I didn't know what the future held, but I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I had made the choice to stop being a doormat, to stop letting others dictate how I should live. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in my life, I was free. Free from the suffocating weight of expectations, free from the guilt that had kept me bound to a role that wasn't truly mine. As they left, I stood at the door, watching them drive away. I felt a quiet pride in my chest. I had taken the first step in reclaiming my life, and there was no going back. I wasn't just Eleanor Parker anymore. I was Eleanor, a woman who had found her voice again and wasn't afraid to use it. That night, I picked up a paintbrush for the first time in weeks, and as the colors swirled on the canvas before me, I realized that this was the beginning of something new. A new chapter. For me, and for the people who would truly respect the woman I had become. The weeks that followed my conversation with David and Linda were a strange mix of relief and continued tension. I had set my boundaries, but I could feel the undercurrent of resistance still lurking beneath the surface. They didn't say much after that day, but I knew things weren't quite settled. There was a sense that they were trying to figure out how to re-enter my life without triggering another confrontation. And yet, I wasn't sure they fully understood the changes I had made within myself. At first, I kept my distance, focusing on the things that mattered most to me. My painting classes became a sanctuary, a place where I could retreat and reconnect with parts of myself I had long ignored. I poured hours into my work, learning new techniques, experimenting with colors, and feeling that creative spark that had been dormant for years come back to life. It felt so good to do something just for me. One afternoon, I found myself at the community art fair, nervously setting up my small booth with a few of my paintings displayed for sale. I wasn't sure what to expect, but when people started stopping by, admiring my work, I felt a quiet pride growing inside me. I had done this for myself, not for anyone else. The fact that people were enjoying my paintings, asking about the stories behind them, it made me feel seen again, not just as someone who gave, but as someone with talent and passion, someone worthy of recognition beyond my role as a provider. By the time the fair ended, I had sold 2 of my pieces. The sense of accomplishment was overwhelming, but more than that, it was the sense of self that I had been craving for so long. I wasn't just Eleanor, the lady who paid for everything. I was Eleanor, the artist, the woman who could create something meaningful, something that others found beauty in. It was exhilarating. For the first time in years, I felt like I was taking ownership of my life again. Ethan had been a huge support throughout all of this. His excitement about the bookstore never waned, and I found myself spending more time with him, helping him where I could. He was so full of ideas, ideas that were grounded, practical, but also full of heart. Every time we talked about the bookstore, he reminded me of what it was like to dream without the weight of financial expectation hanging over my head. His gratitude was always genuine, and his work ethic inspired me to keep going, to keep doing things for myself and not just for others. I had come to realize that my role as a mother and grandmother had to shift. I didn't have to keep sacrificing myself to be loved. I deserved to be loved for who I was, not for what I could provide. One day, as we were sitting at the small table in his new bookstore, sipping coffee and discussing future plans, Ethan looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "Grandma, I don't know what to say," he began, his voice quiet but filled with emotion. "You've really helped me make this happen. I don't think I could have done it without you." I smiled at him, feeling the warmth of his words settle in my chest. "Ethan, you're the one who worked for it," I replied, my voice steady but soft. "I just helped with a little bit of the groundwork. But this is all you." He shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "No, Grandma. You helped me believe in myself. You showed me that investing in something you love is worth it, even if no one else sees it at first." I looked around the bookstore, the shelves filled with books and the cozy reading nook in the corner where people would soon gather. It was small, but it was full of potential. It was exactly the kind of place I had always imagined, where people could come together and share in something meaningful. And as I looked at Ethan, I realized that this was one of the best things I had ever done, not just for him, but for myself as well. Helping him pursue his dreams had given me the opportunity to reignite mine. It had given me the courage to live for myself again, to stop letting the demands of others dictate who I was. But as proud as I was of Ethan, there was still the matter of my relationship with David and Linda. They hadn't come by the bookstore yet, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they would try to make their presence known again. I hadn't heard much from them since our last conversation, but I felt that old pattern starting to creep back in. I wasn't naive. I knew they would try to test my resolve again to see if I would revert back to the old Eleanor, the one who gave without question. And when the call came, I wasn't surprised. It was David, and his voice was familiar, but different somehow, quieter, more tentative. "Mom, we need to talk," he said. "Linda and I have been thinking about what you said. We know we haven't always treated you right, and I think we owe you an apology." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "David, I appreciate that," I said, my voice calm. "But understand this. It's not just about the money anymore. It's about respect. It's about you seeing me as more than just someone who provides. You don't get to take from me without thinking about what I need too." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. "I understand, Mom," he finally said. "We've been selfish, and I'm sorry for that." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "It's going to take time, David. I need to see real change. And it's not just about money. It's about the way you treat me and the way you treat others around you." "I get it," he said. "I'll work on it, Mom." That conversation didn't fix everything. It didn't suddenly erase the years of entitlement and expectation. But it was a start. And I realized, as I hung up the phone, that this wasn't just about them learning to treat me better. It was about me learning to hold space for myself and not feel guilty for doing so. I hung up and walked to my art easel. There was a new painting waiting to be finished, a reminder that my life was mine to shape and that I had a lot of good things ahead of me. The future felt lighter now, like the weight had been lifted. I didn't need to carry the expectations of others anymore. I could finally live for myself. It had been several weeks since my conversation with David, and though I'd set firm boundaries, there was still a lingering uncertainty hanging in the air. I couldn't deny that I had always been the glue holding the family together, even if that meant sacrificing my own happiness and peace. But now, I was in unfamiliar territory, a place where I didn't have to constantly give and give until I had nothing left. And it felt both liberating and a bit unnerving. The bookstore was doing well. Ethan was thriving, and his excitement about the future was contagious. I spent a lot of time there, helping with everything from organizing bookshelves to offering my opinions on decor. It was clear that this more than just a business to him. It was a dream, and he was building it from the ground up. Seeing him so determined, so passionate, reminded me of what it was like to have a purpose that wasn't tied to the expectations of others. But even as I poured more of my energy into supporting Ethan, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were far from resolved with David and Linda. They hadn't come by the bookstore yet, despite several subtle invitations, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they would try to worm their way back in. I wasn't sure if they truly understood the changes I had made in my life, or if they were just waiting for me to slip back into the role they had created for me, the one where I was always the one who gave, always the one who kept the peace. One evening, as I was returning home from the bookstore, I saw a familiar car parked in my driveway. It was David's. My heart skipped a beat. He hadn't called, hadn't warned me he was coming. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to expect, before I took a deep breath and opened the door. "Mom?" David said, his voice tentative as I walked in. "Can we talk?" I nodded and motioned for him to sit down in the living room. There was something about the way he was acting that felt different, softer, more vulnerable. The old Eleanor would have been eager to please, to smooth things over, but the new Eleanor wasn't so quick to give in. "David," I began, my voice steady. "What is it?" He took a seat, his hands fidgeting in his lap. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and honestly, I'm sorry. I know I haven't been the best son. I guess I always assumed you would just take care of everything, and that wasn't fair to you. I never stopped to think about what that was doing to you." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a glimmer of genuine remorse in his eyes. This wasn't the same man who had taken me for granted. This was someone who was finally beginning to understand the cost of his actions. "I appreciate your apology, David," I said quietly, keeping my emotions in check. "But it's not just about what happened. It's about the way you and Linda have treated me over the years. The way you've expected me to give without ever asking if it was okay. I'm not just your mother. I'm a woman with my own life, my own needs. And I've been sacrificing those for far too long." David shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I know, Mom. I'm sorry. I guess I didn't realize how much pressure I was putting on you, how much it was wearing you down." I took a deep breath and leaned forward slightly. "David, I'm not doing this to make you feel guilty. I'm doing this because I need you to understand. I need you to respect me. I'm not a bank. I'm not a tool for you to use when you need something. I've spent my whole life supporting you, and I will always love you. But I can't keep being this version of myself who's only useful when there's something to give." He nodded, his jaw tightening as if he were struggling to hold back his emotions. "I get it, Mom. I really do. And I'm sorry it's taken me this long to see it." There was a long silence, and I could feel the weight of the moment settling between us. Finally, I spoke again, this time with a firmness that had become second nature. "David, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for me. I've spent so many years living for everyone else, putting their needs ahead of mine, and I'm done. I'm not just your mother. I'm a person too. And from now on, I'm going to start living for myself." His face softened, and he looked at me with something like awe, as if he were seeing me for the first time. "I understand, Mom. I really do. I've taken you for granted for too long, and I don't want to do that anymore. I'll respect your boundaries, and I'll do better. I promise." I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't a perfect resolution. We still had a lot of ground to cover, a lot of emotional distance to bridge, but it was a step in the right direction. And that was enough for now. As David left later that evening, I stood at the door, watching him walk back to his car. For the first time in a long while, I felt proud of myself. Proud that I had taken the first step in reclaiming my life, in demanding the respect I deserved. It wasn't easy, and there would be more challenges ahead, but I had made it this far. And for the first time, I could see a future where I lived for me, where my happiness was not tied to what I gave, but to the life I chose for myself. I closed the door and walked back into the living room, feeling lighter, freer than I had in years. I wasn't just Eleanor Parker anymore. I was Eleanor, a woman who was finally learning to live on her own terms, and for the first time, that felt like enough. The weeks after my conversation with David were a blend of emotions. On the one hand, I felt a sense of freedom and peace that I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, I was living for myself, not for anyone else's expectations or demands. But on the other hand, there was a quiet, lingering sense of uncertainty. The uncertainty of what my family's future interactions with me would look like, the uncertainty of how I would continue to balance love with the newfound boundaries I had set. David had promised to respect my wishes, and I believed him. But I knew that actions spoke louder than words, and it would take time for both of us to adjust to this new dynamic. I found myself waiting for the next move, for the next request, for the next test, but it didn't come. At least, not in the way I expected. Instead, the real challenge was within myself. I had grown so accustomed to being needed that the absence of requests from David and Linda felt strangely unsettling. For years, I had been the one everyone turned to when there was a problem, when something needed fixing, when a check was required to smooth things over. But now, when they stopped asking, I found myself wondering, who am I now? What was left of me after all those years of giving? Was I still just a mother and grandmother? Or had I finally become the woman I wanted to be? I spent those quiet days reflecting on my journey, sorting through the emotions that had piled up over the years. There were moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether I had done the right thing, whether I had been too harsh or too quick to cut off the way I had always given. But as I spent time at the bookstore with Ethan, helping him with the community events he wanted to host, I began to see that the choice to live for myself wasn't a betrayal of my family. It was a gift I was giving to me. One Saturday afternoon, while I was sitting at a table in the bookstore, sketching out ideas for a new painting, Ethan came over and sat across from me. "Grandma," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I've been thinking a lot about everything you've done for me, for this store. I don't know if I could ever express how grateful I am for the way you've supported me." I looked up from my sketch pad, my heart warming at his words. "Ethan, you don't have to thank me," I replied with a smile. "You've worked hard for this, and I'm proud of you." He shook his head. "No, it's more than that. You've taught me something I didn't realize I needed to learn. Boundaries? It sounds simple, but I never really understood the power of saying no, of not giving everything you have to others. You showed me that you can love someone and still protect yourself, and that's something I want to carry with me, not just in the bookstore, but in my life." I stared at him for a moment, taken aback by his words. "I didn't think I was teaching you anything, Ethan. I just did what I needed to do for myself." He smiled. "You may not have realized it, but that's exactly what you were doing. You didn't just help me open the store. You helped me open my eyes. You helped me see that I don't have to be like everyone else. I don't have to follow the same patterns of giving without thinking, of always putting others before myself." For the first time in a long while, I felt a deep sense of pride. Not just in Ethan, but in myself. He had learned something important from me, not from my sacrifices, but from my courage to finally say enough, to put up boundaries and stop being taken for granted. Maybe, just maybe, I had shown him that respect and self-worth go hand in hand. That evening, as I sat alone in my living room, sipping a cup of tea, I reflected on how much had changed. The house was quieter now, without the constant hum of family demands. There were still moments of loneliness, but they were tempered by a sense of peace I had never known before. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing around to fulfill someone else's expectations. I wasn't trying to fix everyone's problems. I was simply existing in my own space, making choices that were about me and no one else. But even as I embraced this newfound peace, I knew the journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges ahead, times when David and Linda would test my boundaries, times when I'd be tempted to slip back into the role I had always played. But as I gazed around my home, at the small things I had rediscovered, my paintings, my books, my quiet moments, I knew one thing for sure. I had done the right thing. I had reclaimed myself. And no matter what came next, I wouldn't let go of the woman I had finally become. A few months had passed since my last conversation with David, and I had settled into a new routine, one where my life was no longer dictated by the needs and demands of others. I was learning how to be content with myself, how to be alone without feeling lonely, how to invest in things that matter to me without guilt. But still, a part of me couldn't completely shake the fear that maybe, just maybe, the peace I had found was only temporary. That the old patterns would creep back in, that my family would come knocking again, asking for help, for money, for my time and energy. It wasn't that I didn't love them, it was that I had spent so much of my life loving them more than I loved myself. It was one chilly afternoon in late autumn when the call came. I had just finished reading a book on my porch when I saw David's number pop up on my phone. My heart did a little flip, as it always did when I saw his name, and I felt a brief moment of hesitation. Would this be another attempt to convince me to help with something, another emotional plea wrapped in familiarity? I answered the phone, my voice steady. "David?" "Mom," he said softly, his voice sounding strangely careful. "I know we've had our differences, but I've been thinking a lot about the way I've treated you over the years. I wanted to talk to you. I know I've let you down, and I wanted to apologize." I felt the weight of his words settle in my chest. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the autumn breeze wash over me, unsure of what to say. It wasn't the first time David had apologized, but there was something different about this moment. There was an earnestness in his tone that made me wonder if he was finally starting to see things from my perspective, not just his. "I appreciate your apology, David," I said quietly. "But you have to understand, it's not just about the money or the things I've given you. It's about how I've been treated, how I've been seen. For years, I've been just the one who says yes, the one who helps, who sacrifices. But I'm not just a bank. I'm your mother." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought he might hang up or get defensive. But instead, he spoke again, his voice breaking just a little. "I know, Mom, and I hate that I took you for granted. I've been blind to how much you've given, how much it's cost you. I never understood how much it hurt you, how much you've been carrying all these years. I'm sorry." The words felt like a balm to my wounded heart, but they also felt like unfinished business. Apologies were one thing, but real change was another. And in that moment, I knew that I couldn't just let this be another empty promise. I needed to see the change, not just hear about it. "I'm glad to hear you say that," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "But actions speak louder than words. I need to see that you understand what I've been trying to teach you. It's not about asking me for help when things get difficult. It's about respect. It's about valuing me for who I am, not for what I can do for you." David sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of what I was saying. "I get it, Mom. I really do. I've been thinking about everything, about what you've been telling me all this time. I want to be better. I want to treat you the way you deserve to be treated." I let his words sink in, feeling a flicker of hope rise within me. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe David was finally starting to understand the depth of what I had been trying to teach him. But I knew that trust, once broken, took time to rebuild. It wasn't going to happen overnight. "I hope so," I said quietly. "I need you to show me, David. I need to know that you understand what I've been through, what I've sacrificed. It's not just about me helping you financially or being there whenever you need me. It's about being there for me, just like I've always been there for you." David was silent for a moment before he spoke again. "I will, Mom. I promise. And I'm going to start making things right. I'll help you more. I'll respect your boundaries. I'll stop treating you like I did." The promise felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders, but it also felt like a new beginning for both of us. I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be without bumps. There would be times when we would both slip back into old habits, when we would forget the lessons we'd learned. But this was the first step towards something real, something I had been waiting for a long time. Mutual respect and understanding. "I'm glad to hear that," I said, feeling a slight smile tug at my lips. "Now let's see how we both do. It's going to take time, but I believe we can get there." After the call ended, I stood on the porch for a moment, looking out over the garden, feeling the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had finally been heard. I had stood up for myself, drawn a line, and asked for the respect I deserved. And now, I had taken the first step toward creating a relationship with my son that wasn't built on guilt or expectations, but on love and mutual respect. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt confident. I had found my voice, and I wasn't going to lose it again. The journey wasn't over, but the weight on my shoulders had lifted. And for that, I was truly grateful. The weeks following my conversation with David had been quieter than I anticipated. There was still a subtle tension in the air whenever David or Linda would visit, but it was different now. There were no more veiled requests for money or veiled expectations hanging between us. They were trying, I could tell. David seemed more mindful of how he spoke to me, less assumptive about what I was willing to give. But there was something else, something I couldn't ignore. I had become aware of the guilt that still lingered in my chest. The part of me that wondered if I was being too harsh, too rigid, too demanding in my need for respect and boundaries. As much as I knew I had done the right thing by setting those boundaries, the thought of my family, especially David, not needing me the way they once had, still made my heart ache in places I didn't expect. I had spent so many years being the one who held everything together, the one who always stepped in, who always said yes, that it was hard to shake the feeling that maybe I was being selfish now. Was I pushing them away? Was I being unreasonable in asking them to adjust to my new reality? I sat alone in my living room one evening, flipping through an old photo album. There was a picture of me, much younger, standing beside James on our anniversary, smiling as if the world had no weight on our shoulders. How easy it was back then, I thought. Life was simpler when the lines between love, obligation, and sacrifice weren't so blurred. I closed the album slowly, the images stirring memories I wasn't sure I was ready to confront yet. It was then that I received a call from Ethan, the one person who had always felt like a breath of fresh air. "Grandma, I wanted to tell you something," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. "We got a grant for the bookstore, a small one, but enough to help with the next phase of expansion. I can't tell you how much this means. It's all thanks to you." I felt a swell of pride in my chest. This was why I had made the changes. This was why I had started setting boundaries and asserting myself. I wasn't just teaching my family lessons about respect. I was teaching myself how to invest in something that mattered. It wasn't about the money. It was about the purpose, the meaning behind it. Ethan was building something real, something that would outlast the temporary fixes and handouts that had once been the focus of my life. "That's wonderful, Ethan," I said, my voice filled with genuine joy. "You've worked hard for this, and I'm proud of you." As we continued talking, I realized something significant. I didn't need my family to depend on me anymore. It wasn't that I didn't love them, but I had come to see that true love wasn't about constant giving. It was about letting go of the need to be needed, letting go of the suffocating belief that my worth was tied to my ability to provide. Ethan's success wasn't my doing alone. He had worked for it. He had the passion, the drive, and the vision. And my role in this case was simply to support him, not to carry the weight of his dreams. Later that evening, I sat down to write. Not a letter to David or Linda, but something for myself. I wrote about my journey, about the difficult choices I had made, about the way my family had been a part of my identity for so long, and how for the first time I had started to untangle myself from that role. I wrote about how I had begun to see myself, not as a mother or grandmother first, but as Eleanor, a woman with a life and a future, full of dreams that were still worth pursuing. As I sat there, staring at the words on the page, I realized how far I had come. A few months ago, I would have never imagined being able to take a step back and live for myself. I would have never imagined not feeling guilty about not constantly giving. But here I was, at peace with my choices, at peace with the woman I was becoming. The next day, David called again. This time, there was something more relaxed in his voice, less defensive. "Mom," he said, "I wanted to thank you for the way you've been with me lately. I know I've made mistakes, but I've been trying. I'm really trying." "I can see that, David," I replied, my tone softening. "I know it hasn't been easy, but we're getting there, aren't we?" "Yeah," he said, his voice tinged with relief. "We are. And I want to show you that I respect you, that I understand what you need. I don't want to keep asking for more. I just want to be a better son." For the first time in a long time, I felt like my relationship with David was beginning to shift in the right direction. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. I wasn't looking for perfection anymore. I was looking for honesty, for respect, for love that wasn't rooted in need, but in mutual understanding. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my tea, feeling the weight of the past few months settle into a quiet sense of fulfillment. It wasn't the kind of fulfillment that comes from constantly doing for others. It wasn't the fulfillment of a mother who lives through her children's successes and failures. It was the kind of fulfillment that came from finally living for myself, from being able to see myself, to love myself for who I truly was, not for what I could provide. As the days passed, I found myself growing more comfortable with the changes in my life. The house felt quieter now, but it was a comfortable quiet, the kind that comes from knowing that I had taken the time to create space for myself, to step back from the roles I had played for so long, and to simply be Eleanor. The future, once uncertain, now felt full of possibilities, and for the first time in years, I knew that whatever came next, I would be ready to face it, not as a mother or a grandmother, but as the woman I had finally come to love and understand. It had been almost a year since I began reclaiming my life, and when I looked back on how far I had come, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of accomplishment. Ethan's bookstore had blossomed into a small but thriving success, and it was still growing every day. My own personal journey of setting boundaries and rediscovering myself was far from over, but it had already been transformative. I had learned to stand up for what I needed, to make choices that were rooted in my own desires and not the demands of others. The shifts had been gradual at first. At first, I had feared what might happen if I didn't keep giving, feared how my family might react. But now, with every passing day, I felt stronger, more at peace. I had stopped measuring my worth by how much I could give to others, and started measuring it by how much I could give to myself. The fear, the guilt, that constant pressure to be everything for everyone, it was still there sometimes, lurking in the back of my mind. But I knew now that I didn't have to give in to it. I didn't have to feel like I owed anyone my time, my money, my energy. One morning, as I walked through the bookstore, admiring the way it had transformed since I had first helped Ethan secure the space, I paused near a corner of the shop. There was a new community board where people could post events, book recommendations, and local happenings. I ran my fingers over the smooth surface, tracing the edges of the photos and flyers that adorned it. This was Ethan's space, yes, but it was also a space I had helped create, a space where people came together to share in something meaningful. The warmth of that thought made me smile. I had become a part of something new, something that wasn't about fulfilling obligations, but about creating something real. I wasn't just Eleanor, the mother, or Eleanor, the giver. I was simply Eleanor, a woman who had learned how to be herself again. I had also found peace with David. Our relationship had slowly but steadily improved over the past year. There were still occasional bumps, moments when old patterns threatened to resurface. But the difference now was that we both knew how to handle them. We communicated differently, with more respect, with more honesty. I no longer felt like I had to hide my true feelings or give in to his demands out of guilt. We had come to a place where we could disagree and still love each other, where we could respect each other's boundaries without feeling like something was being taken away. The real change came when I realized that David wasn't the only one who had needed to change. I had too. I had to stop waiting for him to give me permission to live my life. I had spent so much of my time and energy trying to make things easier for him, trying to fix everything for him. But now I understood that he wasn't the center of my universe anymore. I was. And that had been a difficult realization, one that had taken time to sink in. But once it did, the weight lifted. Even Linda had changed, though I wasn't entirely sure it was because of anything I had said or done. But over the last few months, she seemed more thoughtful, more aware. She didn't ask me for things as often, and when she did, it was no longer with the same expectation of entitlement that used to weigh on me. I wondered if it was because she had finally seen me stand my ground, or if perhaps she was simply adjusting to the fact that I wasn't the same person I had once been. But the biggest change had come from within me. I had spent so many years living for others, never truly allowing myself to be selfish in the best sense of the word. I had always been afraid of disappointing others, of being seen as selfish or uncaring. But now I understood that being selfish wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It wasn't about neglecting others, but about prioritizing my own happiness. The real question was, what did I want out of the next chapter of my life? I had so many possibilities ahead of me. I had thought about traveling more, something James and I had always talked about doing but never got around to. I wanted to visit places I had only dreamed of: Paris, Rome, maybe even somewhere in Asia. I wanted to write. I had started keeping a journal of my thoughts and experiences over the past year, and the more I wrote, the more I felt compelled to share those experiences. Perhaps a book, something to document this journey of change, of growth, of finally learning to live on my own terms. As I sat down in my living room that evening, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows on the walls, I felt a quiet contentment. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing around to please others. I wasn't sacrificing myself to make sure everyone else's needs were met. I was finally truly living for me. And in that moment, I felt like I had everything I needed. I had my family, yes, but more importantly, I had myself, my independence, my strength, and the understanding that I was worthy of living life on my own terms. And that, I realized, was the most important gift I could give to myself. The passing of time had a way of making everything feel less urgent, more at peace, and that's exactly how I felt now. I was learning to embrace the quiet, the moments of solitude that I had once feared. It wasn't that I had abandoned my family, it was that I had finally accepted that I didn't need to be everything for them. And somehow, despite the occasional moments of doubt, I felt closer to them than I had in years. David had continued to show more respect for my boundaries, and although I'd known it wouldn't be perfect, I had seen enough progress to know he was trying. His apologies, though long overdue, were sincere, and for the first time in our relationship, I believed his efforts weren't just about fixing things for the moment. They were about real change. We still had awkward moments, still had misunderstandings, but we had learned to communicate more openly, to ask for what we needed without guilt or manipulation. It was no longer about me always saying yes, always giving. Instead, it was about us, about finding a balance between caring for each other without the constant expectation of sacrifice. When David called last week asking for advice on how to approach a business decision, I realized how far we had come. He wasn't asking me to bail him out. He was asking for my insight because he valued my opinion. And that in itself was a shift I hadn't fully anticipated. Linda, on the other hand, remained a more complicated figure in my life. While she had adjusted somewhat to my boundaries, there was still a part of her that expected things to go back to the way they were. She didn't fully understand why I wasn't always available to help, why I wasn't just the mother or grandmother who dropped everything whenever they needed something. But I had learned not to take it personally. Her expectations were hers to deal with, not mine. I had already given more than enough to that relationship for a lifetime. Ethan, however, was a different story. He had always understood the importance of boundaries, and watching him continue to build his bookstore made me realize how much I had invested in him, not just financially, but emotionally and intellectually. We had shared so many hours brainstorming together, discussing ideas, and listening to one another's visions for the future. Ethan's dreams felt more like my own than ever before. And in a strange way, helping him get here had given me a sense of fulfillment I hadn't expected. His bookstore had become a success. But more than that, it had become a community hub, a place where people could share ideas, connect over books, and find a sense of belonging. When I walked into the store now, it no longer felt like I was just helping him. It felt like I was walking into a space where we had both contributed something real. It was a space where I could feel proud of my role in his life, not because I had always given, but because I had invested in his dreams and watched them flourish. I had also taken the opportunity to start writing. It started out small, journaling my thoughts, recording the little moments that I thought might one day mean something. As time passed, I found myself writing more seriously, crafting the stories I had lived through and the lessons I had learned along the way. The idea of sharing my journey, The ups and downs, the mistakes and triumphs, felt like something that could inspire others. Writing was something I had put off for years, but now it felt like the perfect time to explore this new chapter of my life. That's when I began thinking about publishing. Maybe a memoir, maybe just a collection of stories. Whatever it turned into, I knew it was something I had to pursue for myself. This wasn't about validation or recognition. This was about giving my voice a place in the world, something I had never done before. Writing wasn't just a hobby. It was another way for me to reclaim my voice, to share my journey with others in a meaningful way. As the days continued to slip by, I found myself settling into this new life, not with hesitation, but with a growing sense of pride. I didn't have everything figured out, and I wasn't perfect, but I had learned to appreciate the quiet moments, the simple joys that came from living for myself, from finally becoming the woman I had always been underneath all the layers of sacrifice and obligation. One evening, as I sat on the porch of my house, watching the sun set behind the trees, I realized how much I had changed. I wasn't the woman who constantly gave without thinking. I wasn't the woman who always said yes to everything, even when it drained me. I was Eleanor Parker, a woman who had finally learned how to live on her own terms. And in that moment, I knew that whatever came next, whether it was writing my book, traveling, or continuing to support my family in healthy, balanced ways, I was ready. Ready to face the future, ready to be who I truly was, without apologies or regret. And that, I thought, was enough. More than enough. As the year drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come. There were days when I could hardly believe the changes I had made in my life, moments when I still couldn't shake the feeling of disbelief at the peace I had found. It wasn't a peace that came from everything being perfect. In fact, I knew that nothing in my life could ever be perfect. But this peace came from something deeper, a quiet confidence that I hadn't had before. It came from finally understanding my worth, from standing up for myself and setting the boundaries that I had spent my whole life afraid to set. Ethan's bookstore was doing better than ever. It had become a local favorite, a gathering spot for the community. People came in for the books, of course, but they stayed for the conversations, the shared experiences, and the connection. Ethan had found his stride, and watching him flourish in his passion had given me a sense of pride and joy that was beyond what I had expected. More than just seeing the business succeed, I saw how it had shaped him. It had made him confident, strong, and driven. He was a reflection of everything I had hoped for.